It's easy to gloss over cybersecurity. In fact, that's what cyber criminals expect. They're looking for easy targets. Now, while you as an individual may have some passing interest to sophisticated cyber hackers, it's the company you work for that is their intended target. You might simply be the rube they use as a conduit to the bigger prize, your employer. If you read the headlines, you hear about large organizations with complex defenses getting hacked. While those organizations make the headlines, they are not the regular targets of well-organized cyber thieves. The low-hanging fruit are the millions of small to mid-sized companies that commit a number of errors that leave them vulnerable to attacks and ransom. We invited Dominc Vogel and Christian Redshaw, hosts of the new podcast Cyber Monday, to join us for a conversation that matters about keeping your cyber secure.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program of the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the following and viewers like you. Please become a patron at conversationsthatmatter.tv.
Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Well, we're sitting here at a really interesting time in our relationship with cyberspace. And because there's no escaping it. It is ubiquitous. It is our life. But it also makes us incredibly vulnerable. Tell me a little bit about your background, about, what is it that you do in helping people to secure their identity online, and then let's get into the nuts and bolts of it, including your upcoming podcast series on just that very topic.
From a nuts and bolts point of view, we really focus on working with small and mid-sized businesses to make sure that, in terms of the business scape, they are the most vulnerable businesses online. So be able to provide them with tangible, practical guidance and advice in terms of how they should be securing their organization, and sort of the data that they have is really important to us. And that's, I would say, is sort of the root of what we do.
Yeah, I would say if you watch or listen to the news at all, you can't miss the fact that every business deals with websites and email, and you can't avoid the risk of cyber attacks and data breaches.
Well, we just heard about a big one, Capital One Costco, right? Yep. And if it weren't for the perpetrator kind of bragging about it online, what's the likelihood of catching somebody who does this kind of thing?
Yeah, or what's the likelihood that they're even in America?
The attribution is often very difficult for people to their organizations to tie back in terms of who committed the crime. And that's often why, from the approach we take, is that don't worry about who did it. Focus more so on sort of the preventative, the detective, early detection capabilities, and be able to respond when that happens. As bad as it was with what happened at Capital One, they had really good, amazing detection. I mean, they detected it within 10 days of it happening.
But isn't that eon in cyber time? 10 days, eons, that could be hundreds of millions of dollars worth of loss.
Depends on the business.
Yeah, it depends on the business. And when you look at the different statistics, on average, for most organizations to be able to detect that something has happened can often take more than a year and a half, so 18 months plus.
You could be compromised. Yep. Spied on, or whatever it is, for up to 18 months.
Absolutely.
With no awareness that it's going on.
Absolutely. And again, much of that is rooted in sort of the traditional approach in which most companies were just focusing on preventative technologies. So having antivirus, firewalls, what have you. And very little time and effort was spent on being able to have early detection and rapid response. And sort of to borrow a health analogy that we like to use with our clients, is that it's to do security properly, it's very much like just trying to stay away from cancer, in which, yes, you need the preventative stuff and eating right and having exercise, healthy diet, but equally important is, if you do get cancer, to detect that as quickly as possible and have an action plan to respond as quickly as possible. That increases your opportunity or likelihood of living. And in the case of cybersecurity, the earlier you can detect something and the more quickly you can respond to it, you're basically mitigating the fallout. And in the case of Capital One, they did a pretty good job of containing that.
Now, they're a big company. They're going to have their own internal departments. Yes. You're focusing on small to medium-sized companies. How come?
Because Usually within a certain range, let's say below 300 to 500 employees, they don't have much going on in the way of cybersecurity or cyber personnel or cyber leadership. So that is the space that we can actually come in and essentially become their cybersecurity director, or basically chief information security officer.
But you're saying even in a company of 300 to 500 people, they're not giving appropriate attention to this.
Correct.
Well, with that many people, I would think that you're extremely vulnerable. Where are you most vulnerable when you're in that size? Like, is it just because somebody's going to be able to hack into your system, or is it that there is, there are inappropriate procedures, there's employee, not necessarily willfulness, but lack of attention to detail or so on?
For sure. I think, there's a lot of, collective threats, which are looking at from a small and mid-sized business perspective. When you look at the sort of the outside threats, right now the two most pressing ones are ransomware, and that's where something comes into your internal network, and all of a sudden all your systems are locked down, and you have to pay a ransom through some sort of virtual currency to regain access to your
So they've
data.
shut you out of your own data.
Yeah, and again, that's from an external threat perspective. Another one is with these new forms of social engineering scams, mainly called wire transfer scams, where it looks like it's coming from a CFO or someone who's in charge of finance, sending an email to someone in accounts payable saying, hey, I'm on vacation right now, but we need to pay this invoice, wire $100,000 that way.
I got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back. Conversations That Matter is brought to you by Odlum Brown, a client-focused investment firm that starts client relationships with straightforward conversations focused on you, your aspirations, and your investment priorities. Odlum Brown has been a supporter of Conversations That Matter from the day we started this show. Their only condition was that we provide a non-biased conversation with people from all sides of all sorts of issues. And of course, we couldn't produce this show without the support of Oh Boy Productions. If you're looking to produce a show like this one, I suggest you reach out to Oh Boy. They can help you produce it, and they can help you build your audience. And we also need your support. I ask you to please pledge $1 per show by going to conversationsthatmatter.tv/donate, because those dollars add up and play an important role in helping us produce this show. Now, back to the show. I know somebody in mid-sized to medium company who, gets a notification from his accountant saying, "So do you want me to pay this?"
Yep.
This bill, yes. and it was only because the accountant was asking, but the accountant didn't realize that there was even something wrong with the email because it looked like it was coming from him.
Yes, because they do a really good job of imitating the author. So they look at the communication style, the writing style, the email signature, and it really does look like it's coming from that person.
It turned out to be like one little
quirk
thing that made it different.
We often say these social engineering scams have come a long way from the mid-90s when it was just the Nigerian prince scam. Everyone can look at that and identify that now. And I think one of the important things is to sort of rewire people's mindsets to understand that it's no longer those types of scams we should be worrying about. If you think you can identify a scam, your headspace is stuck a couple decades in the past. You need to realize how generally speaking, they are quite sophisticated, and having, I think, the right controls in place and right processes in place to make sure that you're at least reducing the likelihood of you falling for that type of scam.
When you take on a new client, what does the process look like? How does it start, and where do you go from there?
We want to understand their industry. We want to understand their company and their culture, and then we want to baseline what their risks are. So assess the risks, diagnose the problem, come in with an exact diagnosis before you come in with an exact solution.
You're doing an audit, and then you come up with a bespoke program or strategy to help protect that company.
Correct. So that's the first kind of red flag, is anybody coming in with a different approach to that, you want to be wary, and you don't want to move beyond the diagnosis stage first. So then from there, step 2 would be the quick wins. So what can we do in the organization that will make us more secure, either from a people standpoint, from a policy and procedure standpoint, or from a technology standpoint? Which are the biggest bang for our buck?
Okay, what I find interesting about your list is that you started with people, procedures, and
Yes.
so on before you went to technology. Why is that? Is that because that's where we're most vulnerable?
And again, this is something which has been our approach from day one, and it's something which Christian and I have just melded on in the fact that it's not a technology problem. Ergo, technology alone cannot be the solution. And especially when you look at the small and mid-sized business space, when we're talking, these are organizations which are resource restrained as it is. It does very little good to come and say, okay, we'll drop in that solution, and then all your problems will be solved. If we were to do that, A, we would be liars, and B, it wouldn't achieve anything. Often that greatest area for improvement, like Christian was saying, in terms of those biggest risk reduction areas, is at the people and process side when we're looking at the broader aspects of security.
Yeah, and if you have a poor process, putting a technology on top of that is only going to magnify a bad process and just spread the problem even worse.
Do you then have to sit down and do training with staff to say, here are known scams, here are things that you need to pay attention to? And how do you then get people to actually, because everybody lives busy lives, pay attention to that?
The first thing is that it's not just the staff, but it's also the leadership as well. And maybe it's the board, maybe it's somebody in the executive management. They can become victims, right? So from their perspective, it takes humility, and it takes them setting the tone and setting the example. So
Absolutely. I think to tie into the piece of which you were asking there in terms of how do you compel them to care about it, in this day and age, there's that sort of that blurring between sort of business and personal life. People will do work on their home computer, and they'll be doing personal stuff on their business or work computer. And the thing is, it's like you were saying there, it's all across the spectrum now. Cyberspace is everywhere, and especially the way we approach cyber awareness is if we can provide pragmatic examples and advice in terms of here's how to stay safe online, here's how you can keep your family safe online, here's how you can keep your kids safe online. We come from it much more from a personal point of view rather than just at your place of work, here's what you're expected to do. Don't do this, don't do that. Sort of going through a do and don't list, people's eyes glaze over. But when we can say, here's how you can make sure you have a more secure and safer online experience with yourself and your family at home, those same tips translate over to the business space.
You just said something there that I go, yes, of course. People are at home. I didn't bring my mobile device with me. I need to check a file at the office. I go in through my home computer, log in, and now I've created a connection that didn't exist there before. How do I know whether or not my home computer has been, intruded upon or is being watched? And now I've given people, the pathway into my company. And,
that's right.
And you don't. Who thinks about that?
Exactly.
Because the expediency of the moment is, well, I got to solve this problem and get that email out because such and such is waiting for it.
Exactly, and I think at a high level, what's really lacking with small and mid-sized businesses is that the way they've approached security is just by taking sort of technology building blocks and saying, okay, we have a firewall, we have antivirus, maybe we have some web filtering thing, we're good. You don't get that full, I hate using the term, but a holistic view in terms of how to approach security, and that's sort of, we add that rigor and saying, okay, we're looking at this comprehensively. Here are the building blocks we need to establish in order to make sure that we're, again, collectively reducing the likelihood of something bad happening.
Now, you know as well as I do, well, you know even better than I do, that there are going to be companies that are going to say, yeah, but it's kind of expensive, and we've been okay so far.
Although that's not the number one thing that we hear. Yeah, that's the big thing. Nothing has happened so far, so we're probably okay. No news is good news.
That's the number one thing you hear?
I would say that's not the number one thing.
Oh, it's not. So what is then? Let's come back to that in a moment. But what is the number one?
It's a really important thing. It's probably number 2 or number 3. I would say that the number 1 is IT people handle that. So Bob in IT or IT department or our outsourced managed service provider, they handle it. They've got it covered. And I think that's a big common belief. Definitely, we want to not even go out on a limb here. We want to just boldly say that is a misconception.
And in doing so, you expose yourself in ways that you can't even begin to imagine. Because as you pointed out in your list, IT comes further down the list.
Correct.
As the ways in which you safeguard yourself against an attack.
Well, I mean, you can outsource the function of IT. That's fine. You can do that. You need to do that often. But the thing is, you can't outsource your risks.
Yeah, the accountability factor.
Yeah.
Your customers, your shareholders, your business partners are going to hold you accountable for the information that they give you.
That brings up, okay, now I have been breached, and then I get that call from my client's lawyer, because there are legal consequences for not paying attention to this.
Yes.
What are some of those consequences? like how bad can it get? And then what is the responsibility back to the company, or if there's a board of directors, to those board members?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, there are some responsibilities once you have a breach. So hopefully you've got your lawyer relationship intact and ready to go.
Your own lawyer.
Your own
That's right.
who is up to date on cyber
That's right. Yeah.
tort, I
Yeah.
would imagine.
yeah.
Yes.
That's when everything kind of hits the fan. So you want to have your kind of breach response team ready to go, and there are some key members of that. Legal is but a part of that, but it's nice to have that attorney-client privilege going on to have that layer of protection. But you'll have notification responsibilities to, let's say, in the Capital One or the Marriott breach or whatever breach is going to happen next week. Those notification
Because it is going to happen.
Yeah.
isn't it?
responsibilities
Yeah.
are your first
Yep.
first level.
Yeah, and depending again on jurisdiction, class action lawsuits are becoming a more frequent item in response to data breaches. I mean, you tend to see that in the States more so than in other areas, just because I guess there's more lawyers there. It's a different legal environment, but that is another piece to keep in mind as well. That we're seeing more and more class action lawsuits after data
And
breaches.
so when you go into court, you have to be able to demonstrate that you have been doing everything you can
Yep.
to mitigate that risk. Because if you
right.
don't, then you're entirely vulnerable for all those losses.
That is exactly right, and that's what they call reasonableness. So it's basically protecting your clients and your shareholders and your patients. Let's say you're a medical firm from harm, protecting their private information without being overly burdensome to your organization from an expense standpoint. And all of that process starts with the assessment. Once you start assessing your risks, you then step into that reasonable security journey.
Yeah.
So who are the people who carry out these kinds of crimes? Because when I think about the Capital One Costco, it was basically somebody who wanted to say, well, you see, I can do this, and then started bragging about it. Is this really just a, like people saying, look at how smart I am, or is there actual criminal intent?
Yeah.
You got people who have, evil motives. Well, they are.
Yeah.
Because you're disrupting people's lives. You're hurting other people.
Well, especially in the landscape of small and mid-sized businesses, generally speaking, the people who are targeting them are organized criminals. Cybercrime has fast become the biggest sort of section of organized crime in the world. It's surpassed the drug trade because it's safer. People there don't have to carry guns. It's very hard to find for law enforcement to find you. So it's quickly become the
And it's cross-jurisdictional.
Absolutely.
And it could be even international.
Absolutely. Often these organized criminal groups are just all over the world. They're in Eastern Europe. They could be in South America. They could be in North America. And in the case of Capital One, yes, that was sort of a lone wolf. But by and far, for most small and mid-sized businesses, they're going to be hit by organized crime.
In listening to the recording of one of your podcasts, I heard one of your guests say, ransomware, for instance, they come along and they go, okay, you got to give us like $12,000. Well, why didn't they ask for $120,000? And the reason for it is that they've been watching you. They know what you can afford. And so therefore, it's even more specific and within your reach, and so it's more likely that they're going to get the pay.
Which case in point, that proves that cyber criminals are paying attention to the big businesses, the medium businesses, and the small businesses as well. They are very much industry agnostic. They just want to look for the low-hanging fruit. It's an economics game, really. So what we want to do with our clients is make it more expensive for cyber criminals to be successful with them and move on to the next target.
So let's talk a little bit about the show. We've only got a few more minutes to wrap up here, but it's such a significant problem, and it is global. What made you decide that, okay, well, we got to start sharing these insights and tips for people? Because that's not a moneymaker for you. So why give away these insights in a podcast?
Yeah, first off, we just like talking to people, interviewing people. I've always wanted my own talk show, so that's probably the closest I'll ever get. But
I can identify.
Underneath that layer, though, as well, is being able to demonstrate that cybersecurity isn't just for tech talk or just cyber people talking to cybersecurity people. By the sort of the breadth of the guests that we've brought on, being able to demonstrate how security overlays so many different aspects of the business world, whether it be people in PR, marketing, other IT people, legal. So we're really excited to be able to demonstrate how security touches all those elements and be able to just have really great, authentic conversations. I think there's a lot of great pragmatic advice, which we're hoping the viewers and listeners can actually take great advice from that and try and apply that to their business for free. And if they feel that was good advice, maybe they'll reach out again to talk to us or one of our guests.
Yeah, so it's not just the two of you talking back and forth. You also bring in specific experts on different topics. So what kinds of topics are you going to be touching on?
Yeah, so insurance is going to be one, because when you take care of your cyber risks, you want to insure kind of your residual risk. We're going to
Insurance.
Insurance is a big
of course, right.
Yeah,
But I didn't even think to ask you about that.
What is the role of insurance? We got forensics experts coming on. We have legal experts coming on. Public relations, which is not something that we were able to touch on today, but that's really helpful in the event of a breach to know what to say, what not to say, and when to say it. So those are some of the key areas. And I think we also want to touch on some business topics that maybe don't relate directly to cyber security, but our audience is business leaders. Right? Well, most of our audience is going to be business leaders. So we want to add value to them in a way that is very, very concentrated. I'm thinking we're 20, 25 minute long podcasts. It's a way for people to save time. They can listen to it on audio while they're working out or driving. That's just something that we've been wanting to do for a long time, in a concentrated way that doesn't have a lot of hamburger helper or foam.
Right, you get right down to the nuts and bolts of it.
Correct.
Yeah, and I want to point out that podcasting these days doesn't mean that it's just audio. You can also watch it on YouTube, so it's a video and audio. Cass, what's it called?
It's called Cyber Monday.
And I bet it comes out on.
It does come out on Monday.
To double check that. Yeah.
Don't check the date on that.
So check for new episodes on Mondays.
Correct.
And the idea is to try and build a body of knowledge that people can acquire 1 week at a time, but also refer back to as a resource.
Absolutely. I think that's the intent, that we put out great free content that people can relate to, can easily understand, and try and apply that at their business.
Yeah, and are you getting good uptake from potential guests? Because that's always, are you going to get the quality of guest that a viewer or listener is going to say, I want to hear from
Absolutely.
that person,
100%.
rather than just the two of you, even though you're
great as we
remarkably
are.
charming. Yes.
Yeah, no, people are excited to appear on the podcast and just to have a forum to be able to express their views and hopefully be able to help people along the way. So I think people will really enjoy it.
Well, I'll be watching. Thank you very much.
Steve.
Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Stu.
Thanks.